Welcome to The Explainer. Our goal here is pretty simple. We take big, complicated topics and break them down into clear, straightforward presentations.
So let's just jump right in. On the surface, it seems so simple, right? Just a click of a button. But what's really going on under the hood? Well, that's where you find the hidden plumbing of our entire financial system. It's this incredible, unseen world of debts and clearing and borrowing that's humming along every single second of every day.
All right, so it all kicks off with a super simple payment. Let's just imagine two people for a second. We'll call them Person A and Person B. Now, they don't use the same bank. Person A is with, say, Bank Alpha, and Person B banks at Bank Beta.
Okay, now step 3 is where things get really interesting. See, when Person B deposits that payment, they're not just putting money in their account. What they're actually doing is handing their bank a claim, a kind of IOU. So now, Bank Beta is holding this IOU from Bank Alpha. And, just like anyone who's owed money, Bank Beta wants to get paid, and they want to get paid now. So they immediately demand the full amount.
So here's the absolute key takeaway. That simple payment you made, it just created a brand new debt. But not between you and the person you paid. Nope, it's a debt between your banks. Bank Alpha is now on the hook to Bank Beta for 1,000 ounces of gold. Now think about this. This kind of thing is happening millions of times a day. Can you imagine the chaos if banks had to physically move gold back and forth for every single one of those transactions? It would be a complete mess. And yeah, you're probably picturing a fleet of armored trucks zigzagging across the city all day, right? Well, thankfully, that's not how it works. They have a way smarter, much more elegant system to handle all these IOUs, and it's called a clearinghouse. This is where the real efficiency comes in. Instead of Bank A paying Bank B and Bank C paying Bank D and so on, they just bring all of their IOUs to one central hub, the clearinghouse. The clearinghouse then looks at this whole giant web of debts and basically asks one simple question. Okay, at the end of the day, who really owes who, and how many of these IOUs can we just, cancel out against each other?
And this right here, this shows you the magic of clearing in action. Let's say that on the exact same day, some other transaction happened, where Bank Beta now owes Bank Alpha 900 ounces. So instead of two huge transfers happening, 1,000 ounces flying one way, 900 ounces flying back the other way, they just look at the difference. They net it all out.
So after they offset everything, all that's left is one single, tiny payment. Bank Alpha just has to send 100 ounces over to Bank Beta, and poof, both debts are totally settled. It's brilliant, super efficient, problem solved, right?
Well, not so fast. This is where our little story gets a bit more complicated. See, this whole clearing system is fantastic, but it has one big condition. It only works if banks owe each other money. But what happens if the debts are all one way? What if, at the end of the day, it's just Bank Alpha that owes a big chunk of change, with nothing coming back the other way?
Okay, let's rewind a bit. We're back to our first scenario where Bank Alpha owes the full 1,000 ounces, and there's absolutely nothing to offset it with from Bank Beta. Bank Beta comes knocking, they want their money, and Bank Alpha has to cough up the cash. But what if it just doesn't have it?
And now, we've got a real problem on our hands. A big one. Bank Alpha checks its vault and, oops, it's only got 200 ounces of gold ready to go. So it owes 1,000, but it can only pay 200. That's a massive 800-ounce shortfall. How in the world is it going to settle this debt before the day is over?
So the bank is in a really tight spot, and it has to make a choice, fast. Option 1, have a fire sale. It can start frantically selling off other assets it owns, like loans. The problem is, when you sell things in a hurry, you often have to sell them cheap, so you take a loss. Option 2, find somebody, anybody, who is willing to lend it the 800 ounces it's short on. And it needs that loan like yesterday.
And it's that second option, borrowing, that brings us to the last, really critical piece of this whole financial puzzle. A bank that's in a jam needs cash, and often they need it just for a single night, overnight. But think about it. Who on earth lends that kind of money to another bank on such short notice?
The answer is actually pretty simple. It's other banks. This exact situation, this constant need for banks to cover these little daily shortfalls, just like Bank Alpha's problem, is what created a very special, exclusive marketplace just for them, a place where banks can lend money to other banks.
So Bank Alpha can just tap into this interbank market and borrow the 800 ounces it needs to pay off Bank Beta. But get this, and this is probably the wildest part of the whole thing, it could actually borrow the money from Bank Beta itself. That's right, Bank Beta could literally lend Bank Alpha the money that Bank Alpha needs to pay it back. And just like that, a demand for cash turns into an interest-earning loan for Bank Beta. Kind of brilliant, right?
All right, let's quickly pull this all together. So behind every simple payment, here's what's really going on. First, when you pay someone at a different bank, you're creating a debt between those two banks. Second, these cool things called clearinghouses jump in and cancel out as many of these debts as possible, which means way less money has to actually move around. And finally, if a bank is still short on cash after all that, it doesn't have to freak out and sell off its assets. It can just go to this massive interbank market and borrow what it needs, sometimes for just a few hours.
So you see, this deep, deep web of banks borrowing from and lending to each other is the very thing that keeps the whole financial system liquid and running smoothly every single day. But it also means that every single bank is connected to every other bank. One bank's problem can quickly become everyone's problem. And that, well, that leaves us with one last big and maybe a little unsettling question to chew on.